American Psycho is a warning. More than 20 years after its release, and American Psycho continues to maintain its cultural grip. When I look at YouTube profiles, Twitter handles, and Instagram profiles, I'm often met with the sight of Patrick Bateman. When I go online, I see American Psycho memes continuing to spread like wildfire. This is because American Psycho is one of the only films that expertly taps into the psyche of men. It's a film that leaves you questioning your sense of reality. It's a film that shows us the consequences of masking our personality, our opinions, and true self. It shows us the hollowness of our atomized cities and soul-crushing workspaces. And most importantly, it shows us the absurdity of the postmodern era, where everyone dresses the same, talks the same, has the same opinions, has the same plastic masks covering their shriveled core. And this is why I think American Psycho is the only film that serves as an antidote to a world full of cancel culture, repression, and nihilistic barren distractions. And if you don't already agree with me, then hopefully this video will show you otherwise. The movie begins in a high-end restaurant where the waiters sound exactly the same.
Rabbit with herb french fries. Our pasta tonight is a squid rare roasted partridge breast in raspberry coulis with a sorrel.
The movie then cuts to a table with Patrick Bateman and his Wall Street associates, where they engage in a superficial conversation.
I hate this place. The chick's restaurant. Why aren't we doors yet?
Each of these yuppies are trapped inside of their bubble. Now, this might not seem important, but this sets the scene for the whole film. The key theme in this film is that no one actually knows each other, they don't see each other. They all put up their masks and see each other's facades. But I'll talk more on that later. In the next scene, they all go off to a nightclub where Patrick Bateman goes to the bar to order a drink. There, Patrick Bateman is met with an aggressive bar lady, and this is where we see Bateman's inner thoughts come to the surface.
I'm gonna stab you to death, then play around with your blood.
But her non-responsive attitude makes it seem as though this is all within inside Patrick's head. This scene gives us an excellent look about what this movie is all about. It's a movie about personas and the shadow self, a trope that has been played on throughout history, through the biblical stories of angels and demons to the yin and the yang. These are all metaphors that are key to understanding our own psychological and societal development.
The pathway to completion as a human being is through the embodiment of the monster.
Embodiment of the monster.
That's the discovery of the shadow.
It's the theme of personas which this whole film is about. The persona is the mask you wear in public that you think you are, but you're not. The persona contains all the things that modern culture says is good, and the shadow self contains everything that's not part of that.
The path to a greater character, to a more effectual approach to life, lies in integrating those elements of our psyche that for too long have been repressed and denied.
And as we see throughout the film, the bifurcation between Patrick's shadow self and his public persona becomes increasingly problematic. The film then cuts to the infamous scene of Bateman's morning beautification routine. With all his layers of conditioners, gels, exfoliators, and ice packs, the film makes a key point in showing the plasticness and the absurdity of the efforts we go to for crafting our polished public persona, because we go to all of this effort to hide our authentic self.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory.
And this is seen everywhere within the film, where we see the bland staleness of modern metropolises, with skyscrapers and buildings all being carbon copies of one another, with each office within each building being the same artificial box with the same artificial lighting, with all the people in these offices looking, talking, and acting identically to one another. The cinematography and atmosphere is perfectly designed to resemble the monotonous drone of postmodern America, where you live in a box and work for an uncaring machine that demands productivity, where no natural behavior is allowed, neither in the office or with the people around you, where everyone's wearing the exact same clothes they don't want to wear, everyone's showing up to a job they don't want to do and have no connection for, where every week you're trying to fill that hole in the sad shadow of a life that you're left with. And this is what the film warns of, because when you're consumed in this sterile culture that rewards lukewarm morality above all else, you're programmed to never incorporate your shadow self, which to Nietzsche was a key part of self-development. He described this process as going beyond good and evil, but this can only be done when you loosen your mask and escape the confines of conventional expectations. To do this as a man, you need aggression and expression for your own self-development. But in a culture that erodes authentic self-expression and rewards material conformity, we start to see the consequences of this begin to manifest. And this is exactly what American Psycho taps into. We see this in the next scene where Patrick is with his fiancée on another night out. In this scene, it quickly becomes obvious that their relationship is only a social mask to keep up their public appearances to fit in with the rest.
Because I want to fit in.
With the whole night out being another means of blending in and conforming. As they walk in, everything is comedically shallow. Patrick's supposed friend is kissing his wife, Patrick is indifferent about it as he's having his own affair, and the person he's with is drugged out of their mind. Because for these people to release their shadow self, they have to gratify their immediate impulses to feel some sort of connection. And the hollowness of this whole situation is perfectly summed up with Patrick Bateman's social justice-y corporate political speech.
And oppose racial discrimination and promote civil rights, while also promoting equal rights for women. Most importantly, we have to promote general social concern. We have to encourage a return to traditional moral values.
He's just forced into being another walking, talking clone that this corporate culture births, where the most bland and trite opinions are the only way to keep up the public persona. But meanwhile, deep inside, everyone is living a completely opposite life to their supposed values. For example, Bateman talks about returning to traditional moral values, and everyone agrees with him, while simultaneously taking drugs, having affairs, and hating each other, with their connections to one another being as fake as their masks. And this hypocrisy continues to unravel as the film goes on. The first sign of this hypocrisy comes in the next scene, the laundrette, where after just talking about moral values and cohesion and concern for others, Bateman's sheets are covered in blood, all while Bateman is screaming at the workers.
Listen, I cannot understand you. This is crazy. You're a fool. I can't cope with this stupid bitchy.
Because we're seeing Bateman's real shadow side, the Bateman that isn't covered up by a mask, where all his repressed tension is released. Yet as soon as he's faced with someone in the same social hierarchy as him, his whole demeanor changes, reverting back to the polished and plastic person he was when talking about social justice. This theme of Patrick without the mask is a hilarious sideswipe at the postmodern corporate culture, where the most outrageous behavior comes from those preaching social justice the most. It's exactly the life these sociopathic Hollywood executives and politicians live, preaching to the public these flimsy platitudes, all whilst being the most morally bankrupt people of all.
Because you're a Hillary supporter.
Yeah, I am a Hillary supporter, and they know that.
Of sexual assault allegations exposed a dark reputation the movie mogul had long tried to hide.
Harassment, sexual abuse of women is a widespread, pervasive issue.
The independent investigation has concluded that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women, and in doing so violated federal and state law.
However, in American Psycho, this is represented with Bateman watching porn, murdering people, having affairs with drug-addled women.
Ken, you're dating the biggest dickweed in New York.
Which leads on to one of my favourite scenes of the film. The hilarious card scene, where no one can recognise each other, where everyone's card is exactly the same, where everyone has exactly the same job titles. Because everyone is the same. Everything is trying to fit into this sterile environment devoid of authenticity and personality. They only see each other's facades that is manifested out of conformity and cowardice.
Alan has mistaken me for this dickhead Marcus Halberstram. It seems logical because Marcus also works at PNP and in fact does the same exact thing I do. Marcus and I even go to the same barber, although I have a slightly better haircut.
The slightest differences become so important in this world where natural behaviour is dissolved that Patrick almost has a nervous breakdown over poor Alan's business card.
Tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god. It even has a watermark.
To release this pent-up anger and boiled-up frustration, Patrick goes out to find a homeless man. In order for Patrick to reaffirm his ego and assert his place in the social hierarchy, Bateman laughs and berates the homeless man before brutally stabbing him to death.
You know how bad you smell? You reek of shit. Do you know that?
Bateman's public mask is becoming too heavy to handle, as the culture and lifestyle of postmodern New York is becoming unbearable for Bateman. And I'd argue this is what the film is trying to tell us. It's a warning of how toxic corporate culture saturates our psyche, and most importantly stunts our emotional development. The absurdity of this postmodern lifestyle is then perfectly summed up at the Christmas party, where everyone looks the same and is only caring about business.
Hey Hamilton, have a holly jolly Christmas. Is Alan still handling the Fisher account?
Where Patrick Bateman is disgusted by how disconnected and neurotic the party is. And at this point he can't help but let his mask slip.
Scound, Patrick, you're such a Grinch. What does Mr. Grinch want for Christmas? And don't say breast implants again.
Patrick goes over to Paul Allen and invites him for dinner. Paul agrees, but only on the condition that he wants to meet Patrick's fiancée, while Bateman only wants to meet Paul Allen for his own personal agenda. However, throughout the dinner, as they become more and more inebriated, the mask slips off of both of the characters with their inner thoughts bubbling up to the surface.
Great ass. Goes out with that loser Patrick Bateman. What a dork.
Another martini, Paul.
with Bateman feeling inferior after being called a dork and seeing the success of Paul Allen brings a wave of pressure that his mask can no longer handle.
Hey, Paul!
The shallowness and ridiculousness of this whole situation is then perfectly summed up with the scene of Bateman dragging Paul's dead body into his car. As he's dragging away this body bag, his colleague notices him, but only to question the brand of bag rather than to question the morbid intentions the bag is being used for.
Where did you get that overnight bag?
Jean-Paul Gaultier.
However, in the following scene, it pans back to Bateman in his office, just where he started before, listening to music in his own little world, almost to hint that all of this was just a fantasy inside of his head. It's this pattern of daytime monotony and nightly release that repeats throughout the film, and it's why I believe the killings throughout this film are a metaphor for Bateman releasing his shadow self. It's all to escape the drab, meaningless culture that is eroding his inner self. And I think this is why so many men flock to American Psycho, because so many men find themselves repeating the similar pattern. A pattern of wearing your mask through the day and stifling your inner self, to releasing the shadow at night through excessive hedonistic behavior. But to fully understand why this happens, we first need to understand the looking glass self. Sociologist Charles Cooley theorized that people develop their sense of identity through their perception of others' views. Using social interaction as a type of mirror, people use the judgments they receive from others and the culture around them to measure their own character, values, and behavior. So when you have a looking glass that erodes character, humor, and authentic self-expression, your identity erodes and you become invisible to those around you. And if you can't express your abilities, humor, and character, you may start to feel a profound sense of emptiness, a sense of worthlessness and soul-destroying nihilism. And Patrick Bateman represents this everyday repression of expression in a corporatized mega metropolis world, where the cleanliness and sterile nature of everyday life becomes so unbearable that the unmasked self becomes extreme, where your shadow self metastasizes in response to your eroding identity. You may want more power, you may want control, you may want to tell everyone what you really think.
Is that all you ever have to contribute, Van Patten? What about dinner?
Or in the case of Patrick Bateman, this may emerge in the form of murderous fantasies, because Patrick Bateman's inner shadow is swallowing him up.
Earth just opens up and swallows them.
This is why throughout the film we see Patrick releasing his inner shadow at home, watching either extreme porn and horror films in a casual manner just to feel something, or using prostitutes and drugs. Which is why Bateman later admits that he's not very good at controlling his willpower.
I don't want to ruin your willpower.
That's alright. I'm not very good at controlling it anyway.
Because the willpower to maintain the mask is unbearable. The lashing out at his colleagues.
What's the matter, no shiatsu this morning? Touching me like that can draw back a stone. Hold on there, little buddy.
The erratic behavior, using hookers, degrading those lower in the social hierarchy, and eventually breaking up with his fiancée is all a coping mechanism.
You're not terribly important to me.
The cherry on top of all of this is that Patrick realizes everyone around him is going through exactly the same thing. Everyone is so wrapped up in their own mask that their extreme behavior can't help but unravel.
Stop! This is okay!
Thanks, Patrick.
This struggle to escape the perfectly crafted public persona is hinted at with the painting right here. This painting is part of a collection called Men in the Cities. As you can see, all these paintings' faces are hidden away, with their colours being a bland black and white, capturing the feeling of atomization and the need to escape the confines of their surroundings. Which is why these paintings serve as the perfect metaphor for what the film is trying to warn us of. But if you think that investing in contemporary artworks like this is only for these rich Wall Street executives, one startup is making it accessible to everyone. And this brings me to the sponsor of today's video, Masterworks.io. Founded in 2017 by top 100 art collector and tech entrepreneurs, they recently were valued at over $1 billion, making them the first art world unicorn in the world. So why art? Well, outside of being nice to look at, most billionaires collect art because it's one of the best ways to diversify your portfolio away from market volatility, aka what we're seeing right now. It's also a huge opportunity because contemporary art prices have appreciated in value more than the S&P 500 total return by 174%. And the total contemporary art market has grown over 2,700% in the last 25 years. Masterworks.io is a company that gives everyone access to top-tier blue-chip investments, allowing you to invest in works ranging from $1 million to $30 million at a price point anyone can afford. And the best part is there's almost no correlation between art investments and the stock market. So if the market starts correcting, which a lot of analysts are predicting, your art holdings might not experience the same effects. This is why 61% of millionaires and billionaires billionaires allocate over 10% of their overall portfolio to art. So how does this all work? So first you visit their website, create an account, browse their artwork, and invest in any of their current offerings. From there you hold your shares until Masterworks sells, or you sell your shares on their secondary market. In 2020, investors received a 30% net return from their sale of Bansky's Mona Lisa, which was 2 times better than the S&P 500. So personally, I think Masterworks.io is worth checking out for yourself, and with over 250,000 people having signed up, demand is high. So I've worked with Masterworks.io to give you priority access and let you skip their waitlist by using the link in the description below. Now all of this stuff is building up to the climax of the film, where Bateman is thrown into a full-on breakdown, where his psyche becomes fully psychotic, feeding a cat into an ATM machine, shooting police and anyone in his way. But with all the overtop explosions, the people he shoots never actually dying, and the surroundings staying exactly the same, the film points to the fact that this is just Bateman's pent-up reverie of aggression and defiance of convention. Or in other words, it's an extreme fantasy to imagine a world where he can release his extreme shadowed self. In the real world, this repression reaches its climax with Bateman's final phone call, where his breakdown finally becomes visible to all of those around him.
Patrick, I can't hear you.
What am I doing? Sounding so sad.
And yet, the sad truth is, no one cares. Patrick's lawyer doesn't recognize him.
Don't you know who I am? I'm not Davis. I'm Patrick Bateman.
The people around him continue the same superficial conversations.
Now, where do we have reservations at? I mean, I'm not really hungry, but I'd like to have reservations someplace.
The people around him are indifferent, the culture uncaring, and the cycle of repression repeats itself. This blunt ending is in a way more disturbing than any of the murderer's fantasies, because it's real. All the repression masks, all the lives of quiet desperation is just part and parcel of life in the modern world, where we've been taught that people who think differently are a danger to society and that they must be censored into silence. Where we are numb to a drab deluge of hollow, meaningless, plastic culture that shows us nothing but vicious hostility to anyone trying to express authenticity. The whole point of this film is to show the fundamental importance of self-expression and human connection, something that nihilistic materialism just can't replace. We need friendship, love, and community, all the things that the radical atomization and isolation of modern life destroys. Which is why American Psycho serves as an essential message. A message telling us to rethink the destruction of the institutions and traditions that supported the very things that fostered prosperity and happiness. But sadly, this is a message that has become all too forgotten.